Okay, so today we'll continue in the RDBMS series of sessions we are having. And last time, just to recall in about a minute, we created a Docker, we installed Docker and we created a Docker container using command line tool. And we installed SQL Server using this particular command on the right side we see. So we actually extracted the Docker image from the Docker Hub website and for SQL Server, and we installed that inside our container, but we didn't explore it much. So today we'll explore that, and also on the top of that we'll try to install PostgreSQL, try to explore it within the command line tool itself. So, and we are currently using Windows PowerShell to interact with these SQL Server containers that we are developing and building. So again, just to recap some of the commands. So any command that we want to pass it to Docker, which start with the keyword Docker, and there are few specific commands that will give us, for example, Docker PS will give us all the containers that are currently running. So at the moment there are no containers that are running. So if I have to get all the containers which are not running as well, then I just have to give a -a, which refers to all, and it will give me so these three containers. So let me pull this up so I can see that there are three containers. This is the one, the SQL Server one, which we installed last time. So today what we'll do is we'll try to get into this. So we have installed the container and SQL Server inside it, but today we'll try to see how we can work the SQL Server installed inside this container. So once we have these containers, we can see that this particular status for each of these containers saying exited. That means that these containers are not currently running. So we need to start these containers first, and the command to start that is basically just to this one will stop the container, and this particular command will start the container. So we'll just do that. So Docker start SQL Server 2019. It will just take a moment and it will start the SQL Server for us. It will not start the SQL Server, it start the container. We have named the container as SQL Server 2019. Okay, now it has started the SQL Server. Now we should be able to see it in this list, which shows the list of all the containers which are running. So SQL Server came here. Now we have to work with this container. We have started the container. Now we have to go inside this container. At the moment, if you can see, my command line is still referring to my C drive. That means I'm still inside my system. I've not navigated to my container yet. So I need to navigate to my container, and inside that, then I can interact with the SQL Server that was installed in it. So for that navigation, there's a command called. So we basically, again, don't have to remember all these things. This is just for your getting some familiarity. You will find these commands online with a very easy Google search. So execute hyphen. So we are trying to execute this command Docker and hashtag IT. I'm sorry, the -IT is telling that just give me an interactive text environment for that particular container which I'm like. So I'll have to give this container name SQL Server 2019, and later that I'll have to give something called as bash. So all these containers, as I said, they are sub-machines inside your own computer, and they have a operating system inside that. So no matter what operating system your system has, these containers by default will have a Linux-based operating system. And if you're familiar with the Linux, it's normally we interact there using the command line tool, the terminal itself, and there are different varieties of command line tools that are available. So one of them is called bash, and currently you are basically telling that since SQL Server container will be using Linux, we are asking that please initiate an interactive text environment using the bash shell so that I can work with it. So I'll click OK, and it should start the SQL Server. Now you can see that the address has changed, and it's currently referring to SQL Server reference. So again, we are still not inside the SQL Server. We are just inside the container where we install the SQL Server. So that means it's like we've just entered the sub machine, and now we can test here with a simple command. Cat, this particular command will give us the what operating system this particular sub machine is working on. So let's just see this, and if you can see here, I'm not sure if you can, the text is visible or not, saying that Ubuntu, and inside that Ubuntu what version it is, and we're also seeing something called as Debian. So there are different versions of Ubuntu available, and currently this container, SQL Server container, is using a Debian version of Ubuntu. So currently we are in that system, and now the goal is to, once we are inside this container, we should be able to navigate to the SQL Server and log in to the SQL Server, so we can do all the normal stuff that we typically do on a SQL Server. We write select statements, we create database tables, etc., all that, right? So for that we need to log into our SQL Server, which we typically do. So let me, before logging into SQL Server, I'll just show you one thing. Just give me a second. Okay, so if you can see this particular screen, so this is for SQL Server that was installed on my system. So for every SQL Server installation, you will inside the SQL Server, Microsoft SQL Server folder, you will find a particular executable file which says SQL Command. So this command, like this particular file, helps you to log in using the command line interface that which we are currently working with. So what we, for logging inside this container, also we will make use of that particular file and log into our SQL Server. And if you can see here, when we displayed all the Docker containers that were running, the column that which you see here on the at my mouse cursor, the command is the path that it is giving us, where that particular command, SQL command executable is present in that particular submachine. So we'll have to make use of that path to log into that SQL Server machine. So what we'll do now is we'll just copy inside, since we are inside that machine, we'll just write that particular path, MS SQL. So sometimes it will be slightly different. This will, you will get this from the Docker Hub documentation. So it will give you all the commands, how do we log in and all. So inside the bin folder, please find SQL Command file, and then give you the username and password which we set up while installing the Docker image. So this is the command which we used to install, and we have for account username is SA, and for that account we have used the password as this particular one while we are creating. So we will use those details, SA, and password as password 123. And now once I click enter, it should take me inside the SQL Server. Now you can see the left side indicator has changed to SQL Server. Now I can work with the SQL command, saying that give me, let's say for example, SQL select, give me the version of the SQL Server that was running, and I'll click this, and since it says interactive text environment, I'll have to click go for every command that I need to execute. So I'll click this, and you can see here it's running SQL Server 2019. Now developer edition based on Linux. So, and just to give one more command, select name from, we know that SQL Server comes with a lot of system databases, so we'll just trying to see what databases this SQL Server came with. So, and I'll click that, and I'll click go, and we can see that these familiar names that which we are aware of in a SQL Server master database, TempDB, which comes with the default SQL Server installation. Now let's just create some temporary database for the time being. So this is just to show you how we can interact using command line tool inside these SQL servers in the containers. So let me just create that database and click go. Okay, now the command is executed. Now let me just run the select names from databases and check again, and we can see the database that I created is popping up. And likewise, we can go ahead and create whatever the general stuff we work with on SQL Server. We can continue here also. Now that we are in SQL Server, if you have to close this out, the simple commands will be to for SQL Server, we'll have to just click exit. Now with this first exit, we will come out outside the SQL Server. We will enter the Linux system, which is the container. Now we can see that we are again back to the container. And if you have to come back from this container also, we'll have to click again exit. And now this will take me back to my original machine. So this is how we can typically start a container, log into SQL Server inside that container and work with it and come back to our typical system. Now let's try to do the same with PostgreSQL. We have not installed it, so for installing PostgreSQL, we need to take this command on the right. So again, let me actually do a couple of things. So again, we'll navigate to Docker Hub, and here we will find the image file that we need to create the container for PostgreSQL. So, and you can see this is the Postgres image, and here we will find all the documentation that we need to install it in a container and work with it. So I've actually written down the commands here for reference, so I'll just go ahead and execute those. Let me do this. Just bear with me for a second. Docker run name, just give any name to this container. PostgreSQL, and here, just like how we worked with different ports in SQL Server, right? 1401 and 1433. PostgreSQL typically reads the commands at 5432 port. So we are just making sure we are assigning the container to this particular 5401 port and sending the commands that we received from this port to the PostgreSQL reading port. So we'll just none of these, all of this information you will find again on those documentations. And then here we are just trying to provide some so just like in SQL Server, the default account name that you get with is the administrator account SA, but in PostgreSQL, the default similar account name that you will get is the Postgres itself. The username will be Postgres. So we are setting password for Postgres account. So whatever the password we want, we can set it up. Postgres password. Let's just keep it simple. 3, and then this particular last piece, which is telling us to go to that particular image and download the latest file. So whenever you the last piece is referring to a PostgreSQL image. So let's say if you're installing it for the first time, it will try to see if this image file is already present in your system, and if it is there, it will try to use that image and create the Docker container. But if it's not there, it will try to download from the Docker hub about this particular image and then do the installation. So for example, I'm doing this installation. Let's see what it does, if it actually downloads or uses the one that's already inside. Okay, we may have made some mistake. Okay, the port, we made an error here, so we'll just correct this. Okay, yeah, so this should be the okay. Let's run this. I think one more mistake. Yep. Yeah, so it's actually I previously installed file, so it took that file and created the container. Now we can quickly check Docker PS, and if we got the PostgreSQL container, so you can see that the created container PostgreSQL is starting to come out here. Now let's try to log into this as well quickly. So again, a similar similar work that we did done for SQL Server, but it's just that since we are working with SQL Server here, sorry, PostgreSQL, with the commands inside the database system, it will be slightly different. So, but everything else will be same. So, for example, Docker execute, this will remain same. Start an interactive text environment, and you please start this PostgreSQL container. PostgreSQL container, and use the bash command line. So once I click that, it will take me to that container, and I'm inside that container. Again, this is also a Linux based, so I'll quickly see the version of the Linux here. etc os release, and here we can see again it's also working on a Debian Linux. The version name is slightly different, but here also we can see it's working on Linux, the different version of Linux. Now, just like how we have now, after getting inside the container, now we need to log in to the PostgreSQL. So once we are inside this container, there is a command called psql username and Postgres. So it will by default actually for the system administrator account. Just give me a second. Yes, for the system administrator account, it sometimes doesn't require the password. So for SA, we have to send in the password as well. After giving the SQL Server command, we have to give the password. But here, by default, sometimes it will log us in without even the need of password. If you want, we can pass it up, but it's not required. So now we can see on the left side, we are inside the PostgreSQL, and here the commands will be slightly different. We will be using SQL only, but to query this database management system, but the commands will be slightly different. So for example, here for us to get the list of databases, we need to follow a command, so // and L. So this will give us the databases that are present inside this PostgreSQL server, and we can just like we will create SQL Server database here also. I'm sorry, this database here also, database my test db, and click OK. And now the command is executed, and let's just see one more time the list of databases, and we can see my test database is popping up on the top. Now, and likewise we can knowing if anyone we can work with the PostgreSQL server with all the commands that we want here. Again, after we are done with our work, if you have to come outside the SQL server, then here the command to come out is /q. So it's basically standing for quit, and now we will come outside that SQL server and we are inside the Linux. Now, in order to come out of Linux, we have seen command is exit, and this will take me back to my system. So this is how, using command line tool, we can actually work with create containers and play with containers based on RDBMS. Now, as you can already notice that for just a simple task of creating a database, we had to go through a lot of tedious task to write the code and remember these commands, etc., and the interactivity is not so good. And this is exactly why we have various clients that help us work with these servers using graphical user interface. So, and one so we some of them which we are already familiar with, called SQL Server Management Studio or MySQL Management Studio. So we all know this, but for the purpose of this series, we will use a different one which we are not familiar with so far, and that one we will make use of something called as Azure Data Studio. So this particular client will help us connect to both SQL Server. It's from Microsoft, so it will obviously help us connect to SQL Server, and it will also help us connect to PostgreSQL. It has a lot of other capabilities as well when compared to regular clients like SQL Server Management Studio or MySQL Management Studio. So we'll quickly explore this and try to connect to those servers that which we have created inside the containers using this particular client. So if you can see the quick interface when you install Azure Data Studio, you will this is what you will click, and here on the top right you will see some of the some documentation related links for you to get started, how to use it and all. For the time being, if you want, you can explore it later. And on the left side, this black bar that you see, it's called activity bar. We have several options here. So the top one is called connection. So all the SQL Server or any server connections that we create will have to happen here, and you can see that here. And here on the left, second task is search bar. You can search the connections we have, and then we have ability to write notebooks. So here we can write several Jupyter notebooks, the one that which we are familiar with a little bit. So those Jupyter notebooks we can write, and there are several other database notebooks also we can write, Apache Spark, Scala notebooks, all these sorts of things this Azure Data Studio will support. But for this session's purpose, we will not explore all that. So then we have something called Explorer. Maybe I'm not sure, very sure what this is, but I'm thinking that it will help you navigate to the file system and all. And here we have something called Source Control. If you have any, this basically helps you to connect to the GitHub or something like that, and help you able to pull any code that you have inside that Git repositories. So all those things. And here we have something called as extensions. So what this helps us do is it will extend the, we'll come to how these extensions will work in about a minute, but we'll just will add features to the already installed Azure Data Studio in terms of maybe making ability to connect to a new type of a database, or you can just install an extension and that extension will help you to connect to that database, something like that. So but we will see how do we connect to so this is the activity bar on the left, and here we have some settings. Here using the settings we can play with how this Azure Data Studio look and feel, preferences, all those things we can change. And on the top right, bottom right, we can see there are some tabs here. So we can see if there are regular tabs, which, if you run a command, maybe you can get the output, or any errors, we can see that. And there's also terminal command. So basically this will so far we have interacted using the Windows PowerShell terminal, right? So you don't so that what does this mean is you don't need another soft tool running in the when you have Azure Data Studio. You can just use this terminal place and interact with all the containers and dockers, just like how we did in Windows PowerShell. So, and this is something called as tasks. Maybe it will show the history of all the activities that we have been performing. So now that we got an overview of this, we will try to connect to our servers that we have created inside those containers. So for that we need some information, which is, let me just get the information related to the containers that which we have created. I will run docker ps, and it will give me both the SQL Server and PostgreSQL containers. And the information that we would need for us to be able to connect to these two servers is this particular piece of information, which is, so the initial so Azure Data Studio requires for you to be able to connect to any database server two items, which of the those two items are basically the IP address of the server where that server is hosted, and the other one is the port where it will read the commands for that server. So here we can see 000 is the IP. Well, currently it's 000 because since they are installed on my local host, local machine, it refers to 000. But if it is some other server installed on some other system you are connecting to, you need to know the IP address of that computer and then use that in place of this 000. And this 1501 or 5401 is the port, and 1401 is the port where we use for connecting to these respective SQL servers. Let's see how do we click that, connect to these servers. First, let's click on add connection, and it will take me to this. Let me clear this out. These are some, okay, and we will get this particular dialog box. First, what type of SQL server are you trying to connect to? First, I'll try to SQL Server, and SQL Server, and now here I need to type in the IP address since I'm working on local host. For local host, we don't have to give 0000. We just have to type the keyword localhost and select the login approach, username and password. So give the administrative account that which we created while creating those containers. So put in the password, click on remember password, just give a name to this connection so that it will be easy for you to refer. Let's call it SQL Server 2019, and so far we have added the IP address and the user credentials that are required, and the port information we'll have to add while going into the advanced section. Navigate just below and you will find the port element, and now here you need to give the 1401 port from where the container is hosted. So we'll click OK and click on connect, and it should hopefully connect to that server. Let's see. Yeah, on the left you can see there was a new connection in our connections pane, and if I think it's loading a minute. Yeah, as soon as it gets connected, it will give you a status of all the server performance, what is the database size, etc. We can explore this further later, but for the time being we can see go into the database, and we can see that this database that we have created using command line interface and all the system databases which I have earlier. So now we'll quickly connect to our PostgreSQL as well. So for that we will create new connection, and here I have PostgreSQL. So by default, Azure Data Studio, when you install, you will only get option for Microsoft SQL Server. You will not get PostgreSQL connection here. So in order to enable that option there, so what you need to do is, let me cancel this for the time being. You need to go to your extensions pane and find the extension PostgreSQL, and this is how we use the extensions bar, and we will click on install this, and then your Azure Data Studio will be capable of connecting to. So let me just quickly install this. It'll just take a minute, maybe. Okay, it's saying installed. Well, let's try to see what happens. So let's go to connections, new connection. Let's see PostgreSQL, and server name is again is localhost. Authentication type, let's say, okay, let's mention Postgres is the administrative account name here, and password, we'll type in password. And we'll give SQL. Go to advanced as usual, find the port, and here the port should be 5401. Click OK and click connect. Okay, I think we have connected to Postgres as well, and here we can see this. Hold on. The database is showing up here. I'm just trying to see. Okay, for some reason we are not seeing the folders inside that server. Let me check a couple of things. We'll get to that in a minute, but what else I wanted to talk about is basically this is how we connect to create containers with SQL database servers inside that and connect those servers using an Azure Data Studio. And here we have all the typical elements inside that needs the database servers to run and execute. So first we have the database folder. PostgreSQL also will have more or less similar elements. We will come to that in the right time, but for the time we will just explore this. So we have databases as usual. We know all the databases and tables that we create will stay inside, and inside each of these databases we have the tables where the actual data lies, and the views are basically they are called as virtual tables. They are not the actual tables, but called virtual tables are known as views. So basically you write a query, and instead of writing that
you dropped off. Until you dropped off, you were talking about these two databases, Postgres and MySQL.
Okay.
Both of them were showing.
Okay, understood. Got it. So yeah, I was just exploring the contents inside these SQL Server. So to quickly talk about again, so we have databases on the top where the actual data lies. Inside each of these databases we have tables, and then we have something called as views, which are virtual tables. You write a query which is combination of few tables and save it as a view, so for you to refer back to it quickly again at any point in time in future. And then we have something called as programmability. In this folder we have there is a something called store procedures. So these store procedures are programmed some scripts that you will write in SQL, so for you to deal with creation of new tables, or making sure, or you can create a store procedure to execute a store procedure and refresh a store procedure, refresh tables at regular intervals of time. So all those things are possible using store procedures. We'll get to that at the right time, but just to explore for the time being. And then we have something called security. Inside security we will deal with all the users who have currently access to the database. And you can here is where you actually give permissions to different users based on the access that they need. And we have several other elements that are here, which are actually helpful in making sure that your data is secure, that no unnecessary unwanted access was given out, and no one that is not supposed to access your database is accessing your database. So all these elements in the security folder will help you deal with that. We'll come back to these things to explore a little bit more in detail. But yeah, so this is how we typically deal with the SQL Server databases installed in containers, and we connect to them here. In the upcoming sessions, we will try to explore these a little further. We will try to skip all the part that which you are aware of SQL. So we all know select and write all these things, but we will try to skip these things, and we will try to jump to some of the stuff that which you are not familiar with in SQL. We'll close it here.